Hello and welcome. I'm Jay Breslaw, the CEO of Survivors Network, the Rape Crisis Centre for Sussex, and I'm absolutely delighted that you're here to join us in this conversation off the back of our recently published report, I Am Not Alone. How can survivor support services meet the needs of trans and non-binary survivors? And I'm so thrilled that we've got Rory and Kitty here to join me and join you in a conversation about the report, how it came about, the recommendations, and actually the future of survivor support services. So let me first of all go to my fantastic friends and guests here and do a quick introduction. So first of all, we have Rory, they and he. He's a peer support practitioner and project manager. He's worked at Switchboard in Brighton and Hove since 2018. They're a trans mask non-binary person and now works at the National Survivor User Network, and is also in the process of setting up a peer-led organisation for trans and non-binary survivors. We're so delighted that Rory was able to be part of this project, and they're interested in developing survivor-led responses to trauma, which operate outside of the criminal justice system. And I also wanted to add that Rory's got their cat Mab in the background, and so if they make a little appearance, then you'll know why. And then on to my friend and colleague Kitty, she, her. Kitty's a cis woman, and she's currently the training officer at Survivors Network. But she worked as an independent sexual violence advisor for many years with us during the time that she was working on the project. She's been interested in gender-based violence since her undergraduate degree, and also that carried on with her MSc in sexual violence. And she's worked in both domestic abuse and sexual violence charities. And she's got a real keen interest in supporting survivor services to be more inclusive of the trans community. And we're delighted that she's currently working with us at Survivors Network in these areas. So, hey guys, so pleased that you're both with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, lovely to be here.
So I'm going to start and tell you a little bit about where the idea of the project came from, what we were trying to achieve, and then I've got some questions to ask Rory and Kitty. And just to let you all know, this is obviously going out as a live event, but we've actually recorded it in advance. However, we really welcome and encourage people to pop questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them as we go along. But if there is a question that we don't feel like we're able to answer during this event, we will come back and answer it later. So please bear with us, and you can keep popping back if there's something that we haven't responded to. So I've been the CEO of Survivors Network for 3 years, and I'm really interested in the needs of all survivors and in looking at who accesses our services, where there are barriers, what can we do, what can we do better to listen to what people are telling us about the sort of support they want, and how can we adapt our services whilst maintaining the same fantastic standards to be able to actually extend support to people who may not traditionally access support services. And within that, I became really interested in looking at some of our data and information around the trans, non-binary and intersex communities, and looking at representation there. And despite us having done actually lots of work to engage with those communities, or what we thought of was lots of work, and articulating how open we are to self-identifying women and really welcoming self-identified women into our spaces, I felt like because we're based, or our main office is based in Brighton and we work in Sussex, I felt like actually, are we doing the right things? Is there more that we can do? And really there was one answer to me. We needed to go out and speak to people of those communities to find out what it was that they wanted from a service, what it was, how, what affected the decisions around accessing services, and how we could really listen and work with the community to, I guess, put our resources into the right places, because you can work as hard as you like in doing things. If you're not doing the right things, then actually, in a way, it's not worth doing them at all. So I guess that's where I came from. And I chatted with Rory and with the CEO of Switchboard to try and kind of put together a project to say, how would this work as a collaborative? Because Survivors Network, we have lots of expertise in sexual violence, and Switchboard have lots of expertise in engaging with the TNBI communities. So we came together and we really, I think the key thing we wanted was to have survivors at the heart of it, to have survivors from those communities at the heart and directing it. However, when I first started, I really had no idea how special and how really exciting and groundbreaking the project was going to turn out to be, I think. And I feel quite proud saying that. So we were successful in bringing in a bit of seed funding to support us to sort of do a year's project where we engaged with the community, where we formed a steering group. I'm going to go to the actual experts to tell you a bit more about that happened and how we brought people in and we brought people on that development journey with us. So I guess that's all I'm going to say right now. I'm going to go to Kitty and Rory. So can you just tell us a little bit more in a bit more detail about the project?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess once kind of that money had come in and there were some initial conversations or meetings that happened with Jay and Rory and I think some other members of the community as well. And then kind of at that point, I was asked to kind of support with the project and Rory and I kind of sat down and we were like, okay, we've got a year. How is this gonna, we had, you know, quite a lot of freedom about what that was then gonna look like and what we wanted to create. So we kind of started with thinking about creating a consultation. So we had interviews and focus groups with members of the trans and non-binary community to find out what it was that people wanted from a support service. What would people want for us to create? And that was kind of half of the questions. And then the other half of the questions were kind of designed to feed into the report that we knew we were going to write at the end of the project. And so that report is around how can survivor services be supporting the trans and non-binary community. So kind of split those questions up a little bit so that we could use them for both of the what were we then going to create for that year to support people, and then what were we going to kind of be able to think about moving forward, bearing in mind kind of the limitations of what we were going to be able to do within a year. So once we kind of had the responses from that, we set up a kind of peer support space, which ran every other week for an hour, and then that shifted to an hour and a half following feedback from the group members, and that lasted about a 9-10 month time period. And so that peer support space was kind of created and directed with the support of the members of the community through steering groups, through like ongoing feedback that we had kind of put in place so that the space could feel kind of collective ownership. Everyone could feel collective ownership of that space. And then kind of once the group kind of drew to an end, or at least that iteration of the group drew to an end, Rory and I sat down to kind of write this report, both on what we learned from the interview process at the beginning of the project and what we'd learned through the steering groups and through the kind of peer support space that we set up, and with the hope that other rape crisis centres could learn from that report, and that us at Survivors Network could learn from that report and hopefully kind of continue the work that we'd been doing. Does that feel like that kind of roughly explains what we did, Rory?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'd add is to say that the group was set up for trans, non-binary and intersex people of kind of any, all, or no gender. So we felt that was quite important, and also that when we initially set up the project, we were thinking of you might hear us talk about TNBI, so we're thinking about trans, non-binary and intersex people. What we found was that we sort of though we tried, we didn't kind of manage to reach out to many intersex people, which I think was sort of due to a multitude of factors, but could have been like lack of expertise, lack of really knowing where to ask, all of that stuff. And I think there's definitely still some work to be done on including intersex survivors. And yeah, we hope that this report is going to be useful for that, even though we didn't kind of get to have those conversations that we would have liked to.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think, you know, we also really recognise that although we did do this work and, you know, tried to engage with lots of different communities, we also did kind of fail at reaching out to some like people of colour, were kind of underrepresented in the both kind of the interview consultation process, but also in the peer support space, as well as the intersex community. So I think, yeah, there's definitely kind of learning that we still have to do.
Great, thank you for giving that overview and to also kind of be really upfront about the limitations of the project. I think sometimes it can be really tempting to hide the limitations, but actually it's just helpful for everybody moving forward when we're really clear around the people who weren't present within our consultation or weren't present to a proportionate degree. Thinking about the report, what can it tell us about the experience and the needs of trans and non-binary survivors?
So the report, it contains a number of kind of recommendations that are built from the stuff that we heard during the consultations, during those interviews and focus groups, and during kind of from feedback from members who were attending the group. So some of the stuff that came out included the importance of trans inclusion in existing services. So that's sort of the baseline, right, of acknowledging that if a service is a women's service, it should be open to trans women, and should have some kind of policy to understand how non-binary people who might identify with womanhood or feel comfortable in a woman's space might want to access those services and can be supported to access those services. Same with men's services. And I guess that also comes with some kind of responsibilities around ensuring the safety of trans people in those services, that it's not just about putting the words trans inclusive on something, it's also about sort of understanding what the training needs and support needs for staff and things like that are. The next step to that is also thinking about trans non-binary specific services, which shouldn't really be at the expense of inclusion within other spaces. So we're not saying that in order to have good provision for trans non-binary people, you should have a trans non-binary group and then nothing else. And you know, if you're trans non-binary and seeking support, you can only seek support with other trans non-binary people. But we did find that many people said that it was really important to be able to be with their community in that way, and also that it was kind of, it felt like a safe place for a lot of people. Another thing that we found was that service user leadership and involvement was really, really important in setting up these spaces where people actually felt like they had a voice and an ability to change what was going on. I think because it was a really new project, there was something really nice about the fact that we had some people who were there kind of right from the start, who were involved in focus groups and then carried on through group membership and felt like they had a huge amount of ownership over the space that they were in and that they'd created. I think that's really important for pretty much all survivors, but especially when we're thinking about trans non-binary people who may not feel welcome in other survivor services or may have understandable anxieties about going into those spaces. It's really powerful to kind of put the power back in people's hands that way. And then another thing is about this kind of idea about like wide-ranging support and flexible support. So we were running a peer support group, but there was real appetite for a lot of different kinds of interventions and support, whether that's ISVA and IDVA services, whether it's counselling, whether it's kind of social support advocacy. And another thing that came out was that support shouldn't be tethered to the criminal justice system. So a lot of trans non-binary people and a lot of generally don't feel very comfortable engaging with the police, engaging with the criminal justice system. That goes up with trans non-binary people. And so making that support conditional on reporting or something like that, which obviously Survivors Network doesn't do, but it's kind of a general thing that I think needs to be taken very seriously within kind of survivor support sectors, is thinking about where those relationships between like the support that can be offered and the criminal justice system exist. And yeah, I think the final thing was just thinking about, I've kind of already mentioned it, staff training and support and development for people working in survivor services, which is also about, it's about a lot of things. I think something that came up was trans non-binary survivors saying, I don't want to educate people. I don't want to have to go in and give an account or give a training workshop off the top of my head. But it's also about this thing that this sort of fear of going into group spaces and maybe meeting transphobia or something like that. I think it's really important to say that it's possible to deal with that in group spaces, that survivor services actually are very good at dealing with group situations in which people have different experiences and come from different backgrounds and are there to offer support to each other nonetheless. And I think that can be kind of dealt with in that way, and with some extra kind of training and support for understanding how that specifically can impact on trans non-binary people.
I would just add one thing to that, if that's okay. I think also that's about employing trans and non-binary people in survivor services, and that was something that also came up, was wanting to be able to work with people who are from the same community, and that's really important.
Yeah, thank you. It's really helpful to hear that actually there are some similarities and there are some fundamental survivor services have a lot of skills and experience, and actually it's just I don't know, being aware of some of the additional I guess needs or ways that we can facilitate people feeling comfortable and accessing our spaces. And I guess I just want to add that Survivors Network are a work in progress as well, and we're not saying like we do everything great, but what we are saying is that we're really willing to listen and learn and take it into consideration. But it's not easy, particularly when you're really busy. So I'm really really welcoming the support of the community to help us have a think and have a look at what we're doing. But what else can rape crisis centres or other similar organisations learn from the report?
I think kind of expanding a bit on what you said there, Jay, about like holding the expertise and experience to, like, I think that there's like this concern that, or potentially there's this concern that survivor services won't know how to support people from communities that maybe they're not from, or that historically they haven't been from, but actually holding space, understanding trauma, being willing to believe and hear people, that's our bread and butter. So I feel like that's absolutely something that services are capable of kind of responding to. And I think also if the kind of survivor service network wants to think of itself as a feminist space, then that also means recognizing that being feminist means supporting all survivors, and that means supporting trans survivors. And if we're not doing that, then we're not kind of adhering to those feminist values at all, at least in my opinion. So I think that those are definitely things that rape crisis centres could be learning and could be thinking about. I guess it's about, like, for the services that are maybe not making conscious decisions, but like you said, are so busy that they're just kind of running in the background and kind of aren't thinking about those things, that actually it's important for us to be making choices about what we're doing, and kind of backing ourselves with those decisions, if that makes sense.
That point about there are a wealth of skills kind of held within the survivor support sector that are going to be useful for this. That's really, really important. And I think also something that I really loved about this project and about writing the report was about shifting the focus from whether this should be happening and kind of saying, okay, this is well, this is happening, and instead focusing on, like, how do we do it well? Because I think that's a much more interesting question, and I think it's the question that's much more generative and actually gets us somewhere, and gets us to a place where trans non-binary survivors can be supported within these things.
Oh yeah, thank you for adding that, Rory. I think it's really important that we, I'm the CEO of a rape crisis centre. I really understand the demand capacity issues, and we all know about the prevalence of sexual violence and the underinvestment over many years, and in many cases just the difficulty in speaking about these issues at all. So I'm really heartened that I feel like we're moving to discuss some of the real issues, and discussing them more deeply. And I do think we have a responsibility to look at who isn't accessing our services, because what we do know about sexual violence is it itself is not discriminatory, and it does affect people across all intersections. And there are some people who may be less likely to access services. And so because people aren't coming forward, that doesn't mean that it's because they're not having the experiences. We know this, it's because we aren't accessible to those communities, and it's really important that we're looking at, and trans and non-binary people live within our societies. They have experiences in our societies along with other intersections, and it's just crucial that we're able to make sure that they've got access to really high quality, expert, sufficient, trauma-informed support at a time and place that works for them, as we do for all intersections in our society. But I guess there are some areas where we need to put a little bit more development work in. And back to Kitty's point around feminism and around sort of feminist leadership and feminist development of services, it's absolutely essential that that we support all people to receive support. And I think it's fine to say, actually, we need to upskill ourselves more in this area, and to recognise that we don't know everything. But and it is difficult. But I feel really heartened by a lot of the discussions I've been hearing recently, and actually people within the rape crisis sector, and also people within other what have been traditionally women's organisations or feminist organisations, who are willing to have some of these conversations, because actually we're letting down all of our survivors if we're not keeping abreast of some of the conversations we need to be having. However, the thing that I've been really interested in is the process by which this project has developed, and the real collaborative underpinning of it. I guess I'm probably putting some of my own thoughts on top of the question, but was there anything about the process that surprised either of you, or that you wanted to sort of tell me a bit more about?
You mean the sort of process of coming up with the project and working that out in consultation, or the process of delivering it? I
guess I was thinking about the way that the sort of the journey went. So that could be coming up with the idea, but actually I was more thinking about the development and how the group rolled out month to month, and the changes that happened along the way, or how you responded to the group in the delivery. Because I feel like, having kind of been a little bit, obviously I kept in touch with what was going on whilst the project was developing, and that was something that I felt was very exciting to watch.
Yeah, I think it was there were a lot of surprising things about the process, which were really nice. One was it kind of goes without saying now, but when we started it, we were kind of right at the beginning of the pandemic almost. I think it was summer 2020. So and we said, okay, well we'll have to do it online, and maybe we'll do it online for a couple of months, and then everything will be back to normal. But I was certainly quite nervous about the idea of holding a space online to talk about trauma and to talk about oppression and discrimination and sexual violence, and I felt like that would be very, very difficult. In some ways it was challenging, but I think it also meant that it was accessible to people who wouldn't have otherwise come, and that for a number of reasons, both in terms of being able to feel like they were in a safe space, being able to stay within their homes and figure out stuff from there, but also just from a really kind of day-to-day, public transport costs money, it takes time, walking like to a place and walking back, maybe possibly in the dark, is not necessarily a thing that people enjoy doing, especially if they have experiences of trauma or if they're gender non-conforming. There's a lot of stuff around online access that really, really helped in terms of making people feel like they could safely access this. There's also stuff about like disability within the trans community. There's quite a high rate of disability, and that kind of online support felt really quite like exciting, and in a way that I thought of it initially as like, oh, this is a stopgap, and then looking back on it, I think it was probably like shaped the whole thing and made it what it was. So yeah.
I'd really echo that, and it's so interesting because it didn't even cross my mind until you. That now I've just taken for granted, and I was like, oh yeah, that's so true, because we pushed starting the project back a little bit because we thought, oh, it would be better if we could wait and do it when we can do face-to-face, and then we thought, okay, well, we're not going to know when that's going to happen, so let's just go for it. And actually now I think in the report we say like have options of online support, so it's really exciting that that's something that's kind of come from this. And I think that perhaps, you know, people who might not have otherwise felt sure if the space was for them, like I think that there's something there for us to learn about, feeling like it's maybe less pressure to go to to drop in, and then if you were like, actually this really isn't for me, like dropping out, like turning, you know, pressing leave on Zoom is a lot less scary than leaving a room. Like those kind of things are actually, yeah, really important, especially if people potentially feel a bit unsafe attending kind of services or like sectors that have traditionally been or could have been quite exclusionary or could feel quite exclusionary, that feels like a bit of a safer way to enter that space potentially. So yeah, that was a really good point, Maria, which is so interesting that I didn't even think about, but yeah, it's so true. I think one of the things that kind of surprise is maybe slightly the wrong word, but that like I really took from this was like how like incredible the peer support element was. And I think even though like I've run peer support spaces before and I have like recognized the importance of peer support before, I think it was like really, really incredible in this space how important that was, and how actually Riri and I didn't have to be really kind of active facilitators in the space, and how that feels like something we can really learn about how people can support each other and how much people can get from supporting each other. And we talk about, you know, in the report that peer support shouldn't be the only support that's on offer, and, you know, recognizing the additional burden that can place on survivors. And I think that that's really important not to lose sight of. But I also think recognizing just how valuable that was, and how much like all of us got from that. And I think that that kind of was also because people felt such an ownership of the space, and that was because we were having steering group meetings that weren't the peer support space. They were spaces for us to say what's working, what's not working, what would people want to see in the group that they're not seeing. We had like constant feedback loops that we, you know, if we got comments, we then implemented those changes. So I think that felt like a really important and exciting part of the project. And then I think the other thing was like how much time Riri and I spent thinking about each of the decisions that were made. And I think that's something that kind of felt surprising and exciting because it was something so new, because it was something we were starting from scratch. We weren't like, oh, this is how things have been done before, we'll just do those things again. We were like, well, we have the chance to make a choice and make a decision. And so we really kind of spent a lot of time, you know, we'd spent like an hour-long conversation about like one or two decisions, which normally would be made in the space of 5 minutes. And that, I think that really showed, and that was really valuable. So I think the amount of space and time that it felt like we could give to this group and to this kind of project is one of the things that kind of, I guess, surprised me how like valuable that was and how grounding that felt as a facilitator. And I think that hopefully came across in the support that we were able to offer.
Great, thanks for that, Kitty. There's so much there that you just said. But it's fascinating to hear a bit more about how you made decisions and how you involve service users. So, and the report's rooted in the words and experiences of the survivors who participated, and I love the way that their thoughts are sort of and what they've said are actually included in the report. But if you were to say anything directly for people who are planning group work like this and how to engage participants from the start, would you have any advice for people who are looking to do this?
Me, because sort of it was kind of right at the end of this project that I started working at National Survivor User Network, which is an organisation that's kind of rooted in kind of understandings of disability and mental illness, mental health, things like that. So that legacy of disabled self-organising is actually really, really helpful for understanding survivor leadership and participation. But I think there's also something about like there's the basis of like good participation, which I think is about kind of accessibility. It's about being willing to sort of like genuinely change your mind if someone from the community comes in and says, this is what I want, or like this is what you want, I guess. It's also about not wanting to tokenize, so not wanting to like find one person from the community who will tell you that your idea is a good one, and instead and also not wanting to sort of think, okay, I need to find like the real true trans non-binary voice. There isn't one. There are a lot of different trans non-binary people with a lot of different like other contingent identities and experiences who are going to have like massively different opinions. I think the question is like, what locally and in this context and in the context of what you as an organization do, can you do, and what is going to be the most useful from that interaction with those people? Like what's the kind of negotiation there? And then I think the other question is like, what's the specific stuff that you can do to engage with trans non-binary people? And I think with that, there is a lot about like trust building, because right now it is a bit of a battlefield, I guess, in like the media and stuff like that. And I know a lot of trans non-binary people feel very on edge, very defensive or anxious for very, very good reasons. I think especially trans women and people who also like deal with trans misogyny. There is a sense that trust really needs to be built up through these sort of like steady, insistent interactions and meeting people on their terms. Yeah, I hope that made sense.
Yeah. No, that's great. What about you, Kitty? Have you got anything that you'd like to say if anyone was thinking about setting up a project or engaging with people from the start on a kind of co-production model?
I think like trying to create like something so that people do feel that there's like a meaningful ownership. So I think like Ruri touched on kind of tokenism, and I think it's really important kind of not to do that, I guess, is to really think about like what are the things that we think might work well as feedback mechanisms, what we think might work well as ways for people to feel really part of this, and then kind of being really transparent about what those ideas are, and then giving people the opportunity to kind of feedback about, actually we think X, Y, and Z would work better, so that it's not just kind of that someone's involved like in the structures that you set up, but that people are involved in what the structures are going to look like before they've even been set up. And like Ruri said, that they can then be changed. So I think that feels really important, like the willingness for change to happen. And yeah, I think something else, like again, that I think we mentioned in the report is, yeah, involvement doesn't end once the support starts. So we did like a lot of work with kind of what should the space look like and, you know, creating it. But then once it had been set up, once we had a peer support space, we still really wanted people's feedback throughout that. And so I think that would be really essential, is that people know that if then the space that's been set up, it's like it can be trial and error, like it can be actually this didn't work, and that there will be ways for people to continue to be involved in that. So I think that definitely felt like kind of important things. And I guess that doesn't have to be true just for group work or just for peer support. That could be true for the therapeutic services that are set up. That could be true for, other forms of group work or more holistic support that's created, like making sure that, I guess, service user involvement at every level feels really essential. Or at least that's something I felt from this project.
Great. And did you find that people, sorry, Ru, I'll ask another question, jumping in there. Did you find that people were engaging in that process of coming along for support, and then also feeling comfortable to feedback when it hadn't worked? I can see you nodding. Was that something, or did somebody, go on?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that was also, it was important to have different types of feedback loops. So like some people might feel really comfortable saying this didn't work and sending an email, or coming to a steering group and voicing it there. But having anonymous ways for people to feedback also feels really important, because not everyone feels comfortable or confident, and potentially, again, because I think is that recognition that the trans and non-binary community haven't historically had access to support. So there might be a sense in which people feel really scared about criticizing, or even if it's, constructively criticizing the support that's available. So making sure that people know that, their support isn't going to be taken away if they're saying that actually X, Y, and Z isn't working. Ru, did you want to say something?
Oh, I think he may have frozen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go on with the next question, and then if Ru comes back in and wants to add something to the former one, then that's also fine. So I'm thinking about the end of the report. The report ends with a message of power of dreaming big, and that starting from a place of inclusion should be default, not a pipe dream. So have your ideas of what an inclusive service look like changed through the project, and what would your dream big response to the research look like? Obviously that's to you, Kitty.
Sorry, I was muted. I think that like probably the response has changed a little bit, because I think maybe when we started, dreaming big seemed at that time, it seemed more like having services for trans and non-binary survivors, and now it kind of feels like, well, that's really, like Rory said, is really just the baseline. That absolutely needs to be the case. And then thinking about, and some of the answers to people, to some of the interviews, when we asked kind of like blue sky thinking, what support would you want, was so like exciting and incredible. And I feel like lots of those are things that I've now thought that's what support could look like, having, community spaces where people can come, where they can kind of drop in if they want to, when they want to, have access to potentially like some safe housing through that, being able to come for like yoga classes, meditation classes, having long-term counselling available, support that isn't contingent on anything. Like it's not, oh, you have to be engaging with the criminal justice process, you have to be engaging with the kind of any particular process in order to access support, and that it isn't kind of time limited. Like, I think obviously I realize lots of this is completely like scary and probably wouldn't be possible with lots of the funding restrictions and stuff, but I think it felt possible. Like when we were doing the project, some of these like really kind of out there and exciting ideas didn't feel that out there and exciting. Well, they felt really exciting, but they didn't feel like completely impossible. It felt like, yeah, we could get to a place where those things could happen, and where I guess at the heart of that support is available for anyone who wants it and wants to access it. And I guess the services that are available aren't kind of in this binary fashion where it's this support is for women who've gone to the police, and this support is only for men who want to access this type of counselling. That the support isn't cornered off or siloed in those ways. The support is available kind of to anyone in whatever capacity they want. Rory, I've just rambled, so now you're back, which is great, so you can kind of jump in.
So Rue, please come and either, if I don't know if you can remember what you were saying, what we were talking about, either the former previous question was any advice for people planning group work, and then the question that Kitty and I were just talking about was, you know, what the dream big response to the research would look like.
I'm not sure if they can hear us.
No, you're on mute. No, you can't. Okay, well, look, I'll
Oh,
no. Okay, well, obviously it was fantastic to have you with us for the majority of the session, and Ruth just let us know that unfortunately they can't hear us either. So I'm just we still can't hear you, I'm afraid. No. However, I feel like we were sort of coming to an end, but the thing that I wanted to say, you know, really importantly, was that actually none of this would have been possible without the survivors who so generously came forward and supported us and engaged with us and shared their feedback and like were part of the process and like allowed us to listen and to, you know, really try and understand. So I didn't know if you wanted to say anything as a sort of a final word of thanks, Kitty, to the people who took part in the project, either in the steering group or attending the groups.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think Rory and I feel really, really privileged to have been able to do this project and to be part of this project and to have like heard the things that people had to say, and I think both of us feel really, really hopeful about what this can mean for their access, but also other trans and non-binary people's access to survivor services. And we really hope that, you know, services will adapt so that it is possible for trans and non-binary people to get kind of really basic provision and what they're kind of, you know, any survivor should be entitled to.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kitty. I'm assuming we still can't hear you, Rue.
Don't think so.
We can.
Wonderful.
Go on, last words.
A triumphant return. Yeah, I'm so sorry. My laptop chose exactly the wrong moment to just have a panic. Very relatable. But the yeah, I think yeah, that sense of hopefulness I really do share. I feel like this was a really exciting example of like what happens when you just sort of open up the possibilities a little bit more, and it's amazing like how that leads to more and more kind of trust and collaboration, I guess. And yeah, I feel really, really privileged to have been part of it. And yeah, just a huge thank you to everyone who came, because it was amazing.
Oh, Jay, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, everyone who's joined us in this conversation. I'm sorry about the few technical difficulties, but you know what? This is what life's like. And I think what we've seen from the project and indeed from this recording is that actually, you know, we can all come together and we can create something fantastic when we really, you know, when we work together. Obviously, just to say again, for those who missed the beginning of this video, if you popped any, although this is going out as a live, it's actually pre-recorded. And if you've popped any questions in the chat, we'll do our best to respond sort of during the session. Of course, if there are things that we need to have a bit more of a think about, then, you know, check back in later and we will definitely put an answer in the chat at that time. If you haven't had an opportunity to read the report yet, please go to the Survivors Network website, and there'll be a link to the report in the chat and the video, and have a look at and share it with people who you feel may be interested, or perhaps people you think could learn from it, because there's some fantastic stuff in there. Thank you again to Kitty and to Rory and to Caitlin, who's behind the scenes helping us make it all possible. And thank you to everyone for joining, and thank you to everyone who's been part of the project. So I'm going to say bye from me, and bye-bye from you guys too.
Yeah, take care. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.